everybody. It is about 9:15 in the morning on November 30th. So I am starting my next Stephen King read, which is Cujo today. I technically was going to start it tomorrow, but I just figured because I have to work today, I was going to start it while I was on my breaks. I'm not going to count any of the pages for it though until tomorrow because I want it to count more specifically for my December read and all that stuff. I already found out though, before even looking at the Wikipedia page, I did read like the very first page or so of it because there's not, I guess, really chapters so much within Cujo as there are just really extensive parts of the story that are broken up into different sections. And from the very beginning, I can tell you already, this is in the same world as the Dead Zone. In the Dead Zone, there is the fictional town of Castle Rock. That's a town that Johnny Smith in the Dead Zone travels to. There is a little bit of a spoiler with this because there is a character that is mentioned that makes me know for a fact that this has to do with the Dead Zone in some capacity where it's placed in the same town, because in the Dead Zone, Johnny Smith, the main character, does end up going to Castle Rock and helps them solve these murders that are happening in Castle Rock by this man named Frank Dodd. He basically is a serial rapist and killer that you find out in the Dead Zone. So there is a bit of a mild spoiler already in the very beginning of Cujo about the Dead Zone, but it's not necessarily a big one though, because it's not the big bad guy that we do see in the Dead Zone that is the overall encompassing bad guy of the whole book. It's just kind of a little thing that Johnny does over the course of the book that we find out about. But I wanted to kind of take a minute to go through some of the general information because I think personally it's interesting for me to learn about this and have you guys see my reactions in terms of learning about some general information about the story. And for those of you that are also, going through these books, especially these standalones by themselves, it's very fun to figure out how things are tied into different standalones and how a lot of his books kind of tie together even though they're not necessarily parts of series. So Cujo was a 1981 psychological horror novel about a rabid Saint Bernard, which for some reason I don't remember that ever being the case. I always thought it was a Rottweiler, which this is a very popular Stephen King novel. This is one I hear a lot of people talk about as being one of their favorites. I'm a little nervous about this one though because for those of you that don't know, I was the victim of a dog attack when I was a young kid. When I was about 9 years old, I was the victim of a dog attack that was my best friend's dog at the time. You can even still see here, I have a scar that's almost hidden by my glasses. That's just one of the scars, and this goes back about 3 inches, and you can see it kind of goes into my hairline. I have a few other scars that aren't as noticeable, but this is the one that's still always the most noticeable one, especially when I pull my hair back. I actually also then, with a dog attack, had nearly lost my left ear. That was not the most pleasant of experiences to remember, and I actually had to go into therapy for a sense, for PTSD scenarios for a few years. I just had constant flashbacks of the dog attacking me in the middle of class and having mental breakdowns basically because I couldn't handle the flashbacks of what was happening. And so for about probably 2 years or so, until from about 4th grade up to about 6th grade, I had basically gone and seen a social worker to work on my coping mechanisms with it. So it wasn't really necessarily therapy, but it was school therapy basically is how I would see social workers, is they're the ones that work with the kids to develop the coping mechanisms they need to be functioning adults, but they're not exactly child therapists at the same time. That's kind of something that I have been aware of when thinking about since doing this reading series, that eventually I was going to get to this book, and that it might bring up some pretty hard memories because I've heard a lot of people who've also been attacked by dogs that have read this that have said that it is pretty triggering because it's very violent, it's very gory. I know this going ahead of it, but that is a massive trigger warning I would say right off the bat, is if you are the victim of a dog attack, this may be very triggering for you because it's not pleasant at all. The novel though did win the British Fantasy Award in 1982 and then was made into a film in 1983. So according to this Wikipedia page, the name Cujo was based on the alias of Willie Wolfe, who was one of the men responsible for orchestrating Patty Hearst's kidnapping and indoctrination into the Symbionese Liberation Army, which was an American organization active between 1973 and 75 that committed bank robberies, 2 murders, and other acts of violence. Stephen King discusses this book in particular in his book On Writing, which I also have, by referring to it as a novel he barely remembers writing at all, because at the time he was on a cocaine binge, which apparently for most of the books he's written over the course of like the 70s and the 80s was prevalent. Like that was a big thing. He was a big alcoholic and drug addict for a long time, but this is the first time I have seen anything about the fact where he actually says anything about the fact that he was on drugs while writing this book, which according to a lot of people who have also read the book, that's not necessarily too far-fetched because it seems like a trip. He goes on to say that he likes the book and wishes he could remember enjoying the good parts as he put them on the page. And he says it was partly inspired by his trip to a mechanic during the spring of 1977. In a 2006 interview with the Paris Review, he describes how issues with his motorcycle led him to visit an auto shop on the northern outskirts of Bridgeton, Maine. He claimed his motorcycle died when he arrived at the shop, and moments after, a St. Bernard emerged from the garage, growling at him and eventually lunging for his hand. Although the mechanic stopped the dog from harming him by hitting the dog's hindquarters with a wrench, he was still startled by the encounter. This incident, as well as a story published in a Portland, Maine newspaper about a young child who was killed by a St. Bernard, provided inspiration for the novel. He owned a dysfunctional Ford Pinto at the time, which is the car model in the novel's protagonist, Donna Trenton, drives to the auto garage where she encounters the rabid Cujo. So apparently, when it was initially released in 1981, the novel earned and maintained a high position on bestseller lists in the US, but some critics have criticized it for the dismal ending. So it's not a very happy ending in terms of the story, which I don't know if this is a novel that you would expect a happy ending with since it's about a rabid dog. So I don't know what the whole dismal ending thing is going to be, but we'll see. The 1983 film adaptation, though, of the novel had featured a more optimistic conclusion, which, again, what could be optimistic about a story about a rabid freaking dog? Apparently, in other works of King, there are references to Saint Bernard, and there's generally references to the incident of the summer of 1980. And then on Stephen King's official website, he's also listed as a character in numerous other novels, including Needful Things, The Dark Half, and Pet Sematary. That's basically what King does, is he basically puts a lot of stock into like referencing other books. One of the reasons why I love what he does so much is because he's able to create worlds that, with several books, even though they're standalone stories, tie together in different ways that you're like, oh my gosh, like this is all taking place in the same town. Oh my gosh, this is all taking place with the same character, kind of thing. So that's basically all that the Wikipedia page has for Cujo. I will say though, the book is also another short one. It is 309 pages. I am though reading again the ebook on my phone, so the phone version is different because the screens are very, very short. So the book on my phone says it's like 640 some pages. I'm going to be going off of that in terms of the page counts because that is the current version I have. I will probably be shifting over to my Kindle every now and then, but for the most part, I'm going to be relying on the page count that is on my phone as opposed to like if I had a physical copy. So there's that, because typically ebooks will differ depending on the format of the ebook and then too the way that you access the ebook. I don't know how much I'm going to get done with it today, but I do hope to get at least a good start on it so that I'm a little bit ahead of the reading schedule I set up for myself for December, because I want to get through quite a few books before I start a new series. And hi guys, so I am currently about ready to take my break from work. Like I've got like 10 minutes until my break from work starts, and I'll also be taking my lunch break. And I wanted to update you guys on a couple different things. First of all, I'm not yet halfway through the book. My mental health the last couple of days has been really awful. Today is Wednesday. I've been reading Cujo. I've been reading it like slowly over the last like 2 days now, third day going on. But it's been kind of slower than I wanted to because I have had a really bad mental health week so far. I had a really bad mental health night, Monday night, like sobbing on the floor, complete mental breakdown. And that has not happened for a long time. It's not happened for several months, since right before I started therapy. And it was just a really, really bad night. I have felt very uneasy the last couple of weeks. I think that finally, now 9 months into quarantine, it's finally got to me in a point where like I can't take it anymore. I know I'm not the only one feeling this, but the holidays are like a really big thing for me and my family. And the fact that with Thanksgiving, how it had gone last week, where I couldn't actually be with my parents, I couldn't be with my sister because we couldn't actually have Thanksgiving as a family, that really hurt because that's a big holiday for my parents and I. And then Black Friday was very different than how it used to be for me, where normally it was a big event for my mom, my sister, my grandma, and I. It's been very hard to understand that this is just how it has to be for now. I'm very much someone who preaches the idea that like if we want to have these traditions happen, in the future, we have to let go of them now in order to, stay safe. And I still am supportive of that idea. I still really, really think that that's what's going to have to happen. But I hit a point basically where it really sucks. And I think I finally accepted the fact that it's not okay that this is all happening. It's not okay that, I spend so much time away from my family like than I normally do. Like I was very grateful to be able to spend time with them when I got married, but that's the last time I've actually physically seen my parents. It just sucks because I'm very close with my family. It was something very common where I would go and visit them maybe every couple of weeks, if not every week, just because I love my family a lot. And they live over an hour away, which isn't too far. It's not like they live completely in a different state or another country. But because I try to keep things safe for myself and for them, it just kind of sucks. And so that's kind of what I've been dealing with. And then I've also had a lot of other things because like I kind of went on a downward spiral on Monday night. A lot of other stuff came up that I had been repressing, a lot of stuff that I had been avoiding for months that I wasn't willing to talk about. And there's a lot of new things that are happening right now, like a lot of things that I am preparing to do with my life that are very stressful, and it makes it so much harder to kind of cope with everything that's going on. I basically got so very overwhelmed Monday night that I just had a complete mental breakdown. And so Tuesday night was not necessarily as bad, but I went into a bit of a smaller spiral though last night than I did Monday night, but it was still a really bad spiral. And I haven't felt this low in a long time. I am feeling better right now. Like I feel not quite really like myself. I haven't felt like myself for several weeks now, but I feel like today, especially with how last night went, I sat and talked to Robert for a long time and cried and cried and cried. But I feel like he, while talking to me, offered so many different perspectives of things that I wasn't, thinking of or wasn't willing to talk about, things of that nature, that it did open my eyes in a lot of ways. And I feel like today I kind of have a better grasp of what it is I need to do. And I feel like it's not necessarily something that just, magically disappeared overnight, but I feel like today I'm more willing to change my mindset about things. I've spent a lot of my life holding grudges against people that wronged me, and then also taking on this thought and belief that I am worthless because of a lot of the experiences I had growing up, where people who bullied me basically made me feel like I was worthless and that I wasn't important and that everything I did was wrong and that everything I did was weird and all these things, like, just a lot of really petty bullshit that I don't need to have right now because I'm in a better place. I have actually succeeded in doing a lot of things ever since I left, high school and stuff, and how since I left college. And so a lot of the mentality I have is so stuck and rooted in my past because I've been unwilling to let go of a lot of it. So if you need this right now, I know I'm putting this in the middle of my vlog, but if you're struggling right now with a lot of your past bullshit, here's a sign that you need to find a way to move on, find a way to let go. And I know it is so much easier said than it is done. I'm still working through it. My whole reason talking about this though is that like I've said, because I've been dealing with these mental health issues the last couple of days and having a really hard time with coping with a lot of stuff, it's making my read of Cujo a little bit harder. But I will say that it's interesting. Where I'm at now, I'm still in like the beginning stages of it. I think like according to my ebook version, which is different than the normal version of the book, I'm like 140, 150 pages in. Basically, all I know is that the book is more focused right now on the humans in the story than it is Cujo the dog, because what I think that the story is doing is it's trying to build up this world of what's happening around with all these characters that Cujo knows or has met, their personal lives, to understand them and what they're going through. You do see when he becomes rabid, you do see like the instance where he gets infected with rabies. Everything else is pretty much from the humans' perspectives. There's a lot of other stuff going on. A little boy who believes he's being haunted by some ghost that possibly could be the ghost of Frank Dodd from the Dead Zone. The mother is in a fit having an affair and she cut it off, but this man is also like really vehemently wanting to tear her down because he got dumped. And so the husband then too within the story is, you know, trying to recompense this big ad controversy thing for the cereal company he works for, where the dye in the cereal basically makes people think that they're puking up blood when they got sick. Then there is the family that owns Cujo. Father is a drunk. He's not abusive. I don't think it's not been clear if he's been abusive, but he's a drunk. Just found out that his wife has won the lottery and she's not necessarily looking to stick around much longer. She doesn't really think that her husband is, you know, right in his head. She wants to leave and wants to take her son. And then there's other characters that pop up every now and then over the book. Like, it's very much reminiscent of what I know of Stephen King. There's one central issue that happens, but there's so many characters that have their own stories that are all involved in this world. So you're gonna learn about every single one of them. They all have their own backstories, all that kind of stuff. That's all I really wanted to talk about. I really wanted to discuss though some of the mental health issues I've been having, the way that things are currently with my life. These are the only ways I can actually talk to you guys about what's going on with my life and how things are going in regards to then how it affects my reading. Anyway, I'm gonna go take my lunch break and I will talk to all of you guys when I've actually made some more progress in Cujo. But for right now, it's okay. It's not necessarily awful, but I don't really have much of an opinion about it. It's just kind of meh. Hey, hi. Really busy today. Holy shit, it has been a busy day. I am basically my team lead today because the team lead that I normally have with work, she is gone today and Monday. So the day's been going by very fast. And let me tell you, like, it's been nice. I feel like I've been very productive. I have already, I think today, gone through like 12 at least different things that normally would probably take me like all day to get through, but it has been a day where it's been like boom 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 boom. Like, I only had 1 cup of coffee this morning, but Robert got us breakfast this morning too. So like it's been a bit of a good day and a very nice productive day. Not so much on the reading scale at this point. I will say I have now crossed the 50% mark with Cujo. I think that it's getting better, but getting better in the sense that it's making me more scared, because I've already reached the point where Cujo has attacked 2 people out of the 3 that is mentioned within the beginning of the story. And truthfully, those scenes terrified me. Like, having been somebody that was a victim of a dog attack, it is really weird to read something in that kind of vein, because it's not exactly what I went through, but it's close enough to where I feel terrified. But the actual event that happens in the book is way worse, because when I was attacked by a dog, the dog did not have rabies. There's perspectives that are kind of from Cujo that you see that really emphasize the fact that Cujo is not normal. Cujo is not the kind of dog he has always been before. And it's kind of heartbreaking because, you know, I think of like the movie Old Yeller, like when they find out that Old Yeller has rabies and they have to put him down. Like, that's heartbreaking, because for one, that's a dog that you've had around for a long time, that's been a good dog, has been, you know, with you for like years on end. And just the fact that you have to put down an animal in that capacity is really sad. In this case, it's more terrifying because Cujo is running rampant and nobody has been able to stop him so far. He has killed, like I said, 2 people, but there was an instance that happened where a set of characters had found Cujo and they didn't realize at first that he had rabies, and then when they find out he has rabies, they barely get away with their lives from Cujo. They basically have to trap themselves in a car that already is not working very well. The whole point was this character went to the owner's house to get the car fixed because the owner is a car mechanic, but the owner's not there. They don't know where he is, and when they're there, Cujo comes out, scares the crap out of them, and they have to be stuck in the car. They can't move, they can't go anywhere because the car's not working, and it has to have a cool down period before they can try to restart it so that hopefully they can then get out of there. But so that whole thing is absolutely terrifying. Being trapped, first of all, is something I am not comfortable with. It's terrifying to read this, but I'm also having a lot of fun reading it because I know it's not actually happening to me, but I know what the fear is in terms of, having been attacked by a dog and how seeing an angry dog scares the crap out of me. So it's a very weird kind of feeling I have where it's I kind of know what that feeling is like, but I'm so far removed from the scenario because I'm reading about it as opposed to living it that I'm not as scared, but I'm still pretty terrified because dog attacks are nothing to sniff at. They are absolutely awful. I have so many friends and colleagues that have been attacked by various kinds of dogs, which another thing is that Cujo is a Saint Bernard, okay? This is a 200-pound dog that not many people would assume would be a dog that could get violent, but again, he has rabies. The thing is that I'm going to go along on a little bit of a rant here for dog breeds because I am a firm believer that a dog is not violent unless it grows in a violent scenario and is treated and raised in such a manner where they become violent. So for instance, many people believe that pit bulls or Rottweilers are violent breeds. The only reason they're violent breeds, though, is because people train them sometimes to be violent breeds. They've been bred to be in dog fights. They've been bred to be guard dogs that will kill on command. It's all about how you breed the animal. It's the same thing with how you raise a child. If you raise a child in a violent household, they will likely then become violent themselves. But that is not the case for every single one, just as it is not the case for every single kind of dog to become violent from being in a violent scenario. It's more likely, but it's not always the case. And so it always irritates me how people will judge pit bulls, Rottweilers, any kind of larger kind of stocky dog, Mastiffs for that matter. It irritates me so much how people will judge them as being violent dogs and being, something that they need to avoid because they're the sweetest things in the world to me. I have never met a pit bull that has not been a complete sweetheart. My point being that, a Saint Bernard typically is not one you would assume would become violent in any way unless there was something like rabies. But again, it all depends on how they're bred. It all depends on the environment that they grow in, because if you raise them in a way to become violent, they will be violent, or it is more likely at least, because there are some dogs too who grow up in violent environments and they might be kind of standoffish for a while, but they will grow to love and trust again. And so then they'll be a little bit more open and they will be not as scary as most people would say. Off my soapbox there, I love dogs. They're some of my favorite animals in the world. I grew up with dogs my whole life. The dog that attacked me was a loved dog, but he was very old and crotchety. I think that he just kind of was very angry just because he was at a point where he was probably going to experience some major health issues or something like that. You basically kind of knew that he wasn't exactly fully himself anymore. I was stupid enough at the age of 9 to get in his face and he didn't like that, so he attacked me. So that's on me. Go figure. Now I have scars on my face and on the side of my head as punishment for that. So I don't do that anymore. I think the biggest thing for me right now that I want to see is I want to exactly see how this situation is handled, because like I said, I just reached a scene where a set of characters are basically like in a car that doesn't work, trying to protect themselves from Cujo, and I want to see what happens to them and how exactly they get Cujo to stop. And then also too, who is the third person that Cujo kills? Because there's still one person we haven't found out yet that's supposed to be attacked by Cujo, and I have a theory of who it's going to be, but I'm not certain, so I want to know more.
Good morning, all. Peep the Christmas tree. I got that made this past week. I just haven't shown it to you yet. It's Saturday morning. I've just woken up in like the last probably 25 minutes or so. So I'm just sitting out here on the couch. And I think today I'm gonna spend the day reading because I don't really want to do anything else. Robert and I may do something later when he's awake. I don't know. We talked about at some point during this month we want to go and see, like, go drive through like a light show or something like that. Don't know if that's gonna happen or not. It's gonna depend on how he's feeling. I feel like I want to just sit and read, so I'm just gonna do that, and we'll figure out what this evening is going to entail when it comes to it. Got Cujo on my Kindle. I have my coffee in my favorite Christmas mug, and I've got a YouTube video playing on the background. This one is Mayana. I am living my best life. I have 10 pages left, and I've already seen who the third person is that Cujo kills. But there's another death that I did not expect that I am completely heartbroken over. I don't know how to feel right now. My heart really hurts, and I was not expecting that from this because I was so very disappointed so far with how the book's gone. But this third part is like fucking hard to read. Like, it's basically where everything finally comes to a head, and then like the last 10 pages is everything after, and I'm not okay. I am not okay in the slightest. Okay, I finished it. Oh my god. I think the reason I'm crying so much about it right now is that, like, the whole thing about it is Cujo was sick. Like, he got rabies, and so he wasn't completely in his right mind the entire time. And to see an animal go through that is so hard. It is so hard having been, a pet owner in the past. It's so hard when you see your pet get sick and just slowly wither away. Reading about Cujo being sick and attacking these people, which is absolutely awful in and of itself. These poor people were just killed out of the anger and malice this dog had, but thinking about it, Cujo was just sick. He didn't know what was going on, and reading things from his perspective was so terrifying. But then thinking about the fact that, like, if I was to have owned Cujo, like if I was in Brett's position, who was a little 10-year-old boy, if I was in his position and not knowing what's happening to Cujo while I'm away, and then finding out he's dead and that he attacked these people, I'd be heartbroken. God, I'm such a fucking baby, I swear. Like, this story, like, destroyed me more than Roadwork did, which is really, really weird, because Roadwork was, like, super sad. Like, let me calm down for a second, and then I'm gonna talk a little bit more about my overall thoughts of it. Okay, so we're gonna set up here. This is basically sitting on top of my library cart because I feel like this is just gonna be the easiest way to go about talking about this. What do I think of the book itself? So like I said earlier today, I feel like that this book was not what I had originally anticipated it to be. It did have some perspectives of Cujo when, especially, we, see him for the first time when
we see him contract the rabies from this bat that had basically bit his nose. And we do see him over the course of the book, more specifically when Donna Trenton and Tad are trapped in the car, how he kind of like, you see him go absolutely insane. Now, I feel like the story, the way that I had heard it, and this could be because people presented it to me incorrectly or whatever, but I had always thought that this book was going to be specifically from Cujo's perspective and all these things. I didn't expect there to be this large cast of characters that would have their own stories involved with it. But looking back on a lot of the other books I've read with Stephen King, this is something that's not abnormal. Many times in several of his books, if he has like a large cast of characters all within the same town going through the same event kind of thing, he will have multiple perspectives, and he will center in on some very particular ones that have more to do with what the actual event is, so they are the larger characters, but he will still have quite a few. So starting off, we have the Trentons, we have Donna, Vic, Tad, who they all have their own backstories and their own thoughts and things that are happening in the book itself. Then we have also a small perspective from Vic's co-worker Roger, who there's a whole plot line with that's being developed in the story, because truthfully, if we look at the situation of the book, it's basically a real kind of story where you have all these people that have their own lives, but then there's this small subsect where we also have this dog who's slowly going insane and killing these people, and it's somehow affecting all these other characters. Like, I think that's more of the way that the story should have been marketed, where it's about these people and their relationship to Cujo and how Cujo is affecting them by killing these people, and like how he's slowly going insane because he was sick. Now, that's even a really strange way to talk about it, first of all. Like, that's really hard to deduce what the story's about. So I can't understand how a lot of people would be like, oh, it's about a dog who has rabies. Like, that's kind of bare bones what it is, and that's absolutely true. But what I think a lot of people tend to forget about talking about is that there is other subplots. There's a plot with Donna Trenton, like I said, having an affair, and how that character that she has an affair with, Steve Kemp, is a psycho, and how he essentially does things that make Vic, Donna's husband, think that Donna has been kidnapped, all these things, whatever. Then we have, like I said, Vic's story with Roger, with their work in advertising, and how they have this big company that does cereal production, where there's this issue with one of their cereals with the food dye, and how it makes people think that, you know, people are bleeding internally. Like, it's just a big scare that he has to work through, and then he finds out that Donna's been having this affair, which causes all these other problems. Then we have Tad, who is the son of this family, who is having these weird nightmares, and he sees this monster in his closet that he believes is this ghost of Frank Dodd, who is a character we had met in the Dead Zone. There is another character from the Dead Zone that actually does pop up in the story, giving a closer tie to it, which I really, really appreciated. I thought that the implementation of this character was very well done. It seemed organic given the situation, and honestly just made it feel a little bit more closely tied to the Dead Zone. And then we also have the Cambers, which are the family that own Cujo. We have Joe, who is a mechanic, who is a drunk and basically has this very domineering effect over his wife. He doesn't let her do a lot. He doesn't really think that, you know, she is allowed to do a lot of things. He wants to have his son learn about coming from nothing and working hard, as opposed to being somebody who just steps into money, like becoming a lawyer. He has very, very set ideas of how things are and how things are supposed to be. And then we have his wife Charity, who is not really happy with her marriage. She thinks that Joe is really basically brainwashing their son into believing the same things he does. So she's trying to find a way to then get their son Brett away from Joe, and that does happen. And then we have Brett, who is 10 years old. He has kind of started to see a little bit of what his dad has been saying over the years, but truthfully, his whole purpose in the story is showing how much love he had for his dog Cujo. That, I think, like I said, is what made the end of the story so much more hard-hitting for me, because seeing things from maybe Brett's perspective, where, like, especially because, like I said, he goes away, doesn't know what happens to Cujo, knows that Cujo's not necessarily completely right when he leaves, and then finding out while he's gone that Cujo not only is dead, but then also killed a bunch of people over the course of the time he was gone. It's heart-wrenching to think about. So there's a large cast of characters that do play into the overall story of what's happening with Cujo, but the story is really more so about the fact that Donna and Tad get trapped at the Chambers home, with Cujo basically stalking around them and scaring them into where they can't leave their car. Like, that's, I would say, like, that's about probably a good half of the book. But at the same time, there's other things happening in the rest of the book that, you know, play into the rest of the world and these people's lives. So it's so hard, I think, to figure out how to talk about this effectively, because it's not just about one thing, which I feel like is what should have been told to me before I started this. I should have known going in that it's not just about a dog with rabies, it is about these other people too that have connections to Cujo in some capacity and their lives as well. I think in terms of the structure of the novel, it was good. I actually really did like a lot of what the story did. Truthfully, the way that the story developed and the way that the story like kind of just grew into itself, I think was more than I had expected. And so I think it definitely would be a 4-star, because while it was slow and wasn't exactly what I had thought going into it, that's not necessarily the book's fault, because I think that just people didn't know how to talk about it, so they just kind of boiled it down to the fact that it's about a dog who has rabies. So I feel like that's not necessarily the book's fault by any means. It's just, you know, it's a Stephen King book where you have one singular event that is, you know, involving a bunch of different people that have their own stories, and he wanted to basically delve into them, which and makes a lot of sense because that's just how he's done a lot of his books in the past. What do I feel like this book did for me overall? Like I said, I think it's actually a really good story. I think that for as short as it is, it gets to the point pretty quickly. Everything seems to have developed very well. I feel like characters have developed really well. The only thing I would say I didn't care for is I felt like I wanted a little bit more from Joe. I wanted a little more explanation as to why he feels the way he does about his kind of backwards-esque mindset, where he feels like people who are lawyers or doctors or anything just kind of stepped into money. Like, where does that exactly come from? I feel like that wasn't explained as much, and I wanted to know more about that because it does affect the way that Brett is over the course of the book. And I feel like if we kind of could see that pattern, see where that pattern kind of starts, that would make a little bit more sense as to why maybe Brett is the way he is, in a sense, or what he's turning out to be, and why Charity has so much disdain for her husband. Because it's very clear that she doesn't like the fact that he will go off drinking all the time and be kind of debaucherous and all these things. But I wish I would have learned a little bit more about Joe, and that's just being very, very nitpicky for me. Oh, what do I rate this? Because I really like this book now after finishing it. I really like what it did for me emotionally, as much as it killed me on the inside. I feel like right now it has to be a 4-star, because I can't for some reason justify giving it 5 stars, because there were some things, like I said, I just felt like either didn't add up or I wanted more of, and but I loved it too at the same time. Like, I really like this story a lot. I think though that this is another good standalone. I would consider it a standalone because it is one particular story. It doesn't have, you know, anything else regarding it going on. It does have ties though to the Dead Zone. If you read the Dead Zone and you want a little bit more from Castle Rock, that is something you definitely could do with this book. It doesn't give really any context as to when it happens in terms of the Dead Zone, but it's just placed in the same area. Apparently a lot of Stephen King's books do take place in the same town that do have something to do with all these other books, whether it's, you know, people that were involved with one book or another, but it's its own book. So I would definitely recommend it as a standalone. Major though trigger warnings, obviously, for dog attack, dog abuse, sickness, essentially just overall like heightened intensity. That is all I'm gonna have to say on Cujo. If you guys have read this book yourself, let me know what your thoughts were down in the comments below, especially if you've read it and you were a victim of a dog attack. I'd love to hear what your experiences were when reading it. But I still think that if you're a Stephen King fan and you haven't read this yet, you should read it, because it hits you in a way I think that most of his stories do not. Let me know what you guys thought down in the comments below, and if you guys did enjoy this video, please do give it a big thumbs up, and if you haven't already and you'd like to be, hit the button down below and subscribe to become an owlet in our flock, and I will see all of you guys in my next video. Bye guys.